Pnawn da i chi gyd, a diolch am ymuno gyda fi heddi am y diweddariad ar y ddeddf anghenion dysgu ychwanegol. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me today for this update on the Additional Learning Needs Act. Now, the presentation takes about 20 minutes, and I'm going to take you through just an overview, really, of what schools are currently doing, what the Act means for schools, and then to take you through the training programme that your schools have been fully engaged with for quite some time. Now, before I start, I just want to inform you that your schools have been absolutely phenomenal in their engagement with the professional learning that we've put on. I am in awe of the commitment and motivation that I've seen in your teachers, and in particular your ALNCOs. So I take my hat off to the hard work of the staff, and obviously you need to be aware that they have been relentless in their commitment to getting ready for the Act. So could I have the first slide then, please? So I'm going to take you through the new duties of the Act. They are new to you as schools because as schools you've never had statutory duties around SEN before. Now, you'll see on that slide that I've got the duties for schools and also the duties for the local authorities. Now, you might think that's a bit strange because, of course, I've just opened up to say that this is a session about schools in particular and how they are preparing. But there's a brand new duty being introduced for local authorities. And because of what it is now expected for local authorities to do, I thought it was worth sharing with you because this definitely will impact on schools. So in a while, I'll just take you through the LA duties, or in particular, how they impact on school practice. Now I'm going to start off with school duties, and you'll see there are 4 bullet points there. And of course, they look quite innocuous when they're just summarised on a page, but of course the devil's in the detail. But I think for this session today, that's all you need is an overview. You need just enough information to know what it is you need to do to prepare for when this Act becomes live. Now, all of you as school governors will have received communication from the Minister for Education to confirm that the ALN Act will go live in September 21. There is a mandatory rollout of this, and it's going to take 3 years from start to finish. Now, so by September, we have been asked to make sure that schools are as ready as they can be. Now, when the Minister did send out communications to schools, I thought she was very pragmatic and very sensible. She made it clear in the communications that she was acutely aware of the fact that there was a global pandemic and that we would need to take that into consideration. It still doesn't mean to say that we would delay implementation of the Act, but we need to be mindful of how we roll it out and to make sure that schools are in a good position to work towards the finishing of this within 3 years. So the duties for schools, the first one being is a duty to decide whether a child has additional learning needs. So this will mean that you will need to ensure that you've got systems and processes in school that allow you to accurately identify additional learning needs. Now, once you have made the decision that a child has additional learning needs, then you will need to create what's called an IDP. This is a new acronym and a new term that's been introduced by the Act. The IDP stands for Individual Development Plan. So on that will be, if you like, your plan of action for how are you going to support the youngster with additional learning needs. So it will be your responsibility in the school then to make sure that this is created and reviewed and revised as appropriate. And of course, because of the exceptionally good work that goes on in schools, if we get the additional provision right for children, then they will show very good progress and they may no longer have additional learning needs. Where that is the case, your duty as a school will be to cease to maintain an individual development plan, an IDP. And then lastly, there is a need to make sure that as schools, you provide information which is easily accessible and transparent for children and parents and carers about the new system and particularly about what's happening in schools. Now, just to reassure you, we have taken an approach in the region where possible, we have created a whole raft of regional materials to support ALNCOs and schools, and they range from, well, all manner of things. Some of them could be PowerPoint presentations so that they can deliver these in schools. Some of these will be pro formas or maybe templates for reporting to particular people. We've got self-evaluation frameworks, we've got all manner of things, because we decided very early on that we didn't want to let any ALNCO feel overwhelmed or left behind, thinking that they had to create from scratch all these new materials that needed to be done for the Act. So for the last 3 years, during the time I've been in post, we have worked with schools to create information and materials for schools. There's been a whole series of task and finish groups that have been up and running for quite some time, and they have been made up of ALNCOs, head teachers, LA inclusion staff, as well as improvement partners. And we've then created these sort of quite a substantial bank of resources. Now we're calling these our one versions of the truth, because again, it means that no ALNCO in any one school feels that they have to create from scratch and come up with something that is just for their setting. So we've got resources that are meant to be used across the region so that we can promote consistency and again to stop schools feeling vulnerable, if you like, to stop some schools thinking that others are maybe galloping off into the sunset without them. So we've got a whole host of materials either in circulation or currently being prepared for you. So if I take the example of the information for children and parents, well, we've got posters created, we've got an easy read guidance for parents, we've got whiteboard animations, one for parents, one for children, and for both of them, they've been created by parents or by children in the region. They've been done through a series of workshops, so we've made sure that we've gone to people within our area so that we reflect local needs. So if I take you now to look at the LA duties, a local authority is used to working under a statutory framework under our current system. However, there is a new duty that has been introduced. And the new duty means that a local authority has to keep under review ALP. This is a new term and a new acronym that's been introduced by the Act. This stands for Additional learning provision, ALP or ALP for short. Now, because of this, a local authority is going to have to figure out how it collects the information, and it will need to work very, very closely with schools to agree on the processes for doing so. So if I could have the next slide, please, I'm able to unpack the this new duty as follows. Now, every local authority will be expected to collect this information and to publish it. Now, I don't mean publish information about individual schools. That would never be the case, but it will have to publish its findings from the review. Because the purpose of it under the code, a local authority needs to be in a position where it can make informed decisions about whether or not it is meeting the needs of the children with ALN within its boundaries. And as part of this, a local authority would be expected to have a view on the quality of the differentiated teaching for children, ALN children in our mainstream schools, the reasonable adjustments that are made by our schools to ensure that children with ALN access the curriculum and environment and facilities at all times without exceptions. How well are targeted interventions used? So do you use the interventions that you always use because they are easily available? Or do you make sure that you use the interventions in a way that ensures that you meet the changing needs of the population that comes through your door year by year? How effective are your systems for monitoring progress, achievement and inclusion? Now, all of you will have excellent systems already up and running where you track progress for children's attainment. But what this Act is asking you to do is to have a more nuanced approach, because sometimes with our ALN pupils, they make phenomenal progress from their baselines because of the excellent support that you provide for them in schools. But even though that progress is excellent, if that's all you've got at the moment is a tracking system which measures how they compare to expected outcomes at the end of a key stage, then on paper, some of the progress for our ALN pupils doesn't look all that good. But sometimes it masks the fact that it is absolutely phenomenal progress. So we need to look at how do we create systems that capture that enable schools to show the excellent support that they provide, which in turn impacts on the outcomes for our learners with ALN. So local authority will also need to have a view on how well specialists are involved. So not just in how often do they turn up, it's how then is that information used by teachers to inform teaching and learning. A local authority will also expect to have a view on the effectiveness of interventions and the expertise of staff. Now, there will always be a need for interventions for some of our ALN pupils, but it's not just the interventions itself that the local authority would be expected to have a view on. It's how well do those interventions then lead to accelerated progress across the curriculum. And of course, lastly, then it's looking at how well children and parents are involved in the decisions that affect them. Now, you can see by those duties, although they belong to the local authority, they will have to work with schools to create clarity about how to go about that. And also you would want schools to be constructing approaches to make sure that they can contribute in a way that enables them to show all the work that they are doing around these. If I could have the next slide then, please. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that the Act is going live in September. Now, the Minister wrote to you as schools in December, informing you that from the 4th of January, you were expected to have an ALNCO in place. Now, there is no expectation that this ALNCO already possesses all the necessary skills, because now is the time to prepare and make sure that if you had a SENCO in place up until the 3rd of January, and then on the 4th of January, he or she became the ALNCO, and to be honest, that's what's likely to have happened in most of your schools. There should be no assumption that just because they were the SENCO, they would automatically have the skills necessary to become the ALNCO. The ALNCO role is very different to the SENCO role. But that's all you need to do as governors, is to be aware of the fact that the Minister expects you to use the time well, if you like. So given that they've been in post now since January the 4th, your role or your joint role as school leaders with the head teacher was to consider the skill set of the ALNCO. And if there are any development needs, then it's to make sure that the ALNCO is well supported to develop those. And in a minute, I'll explain that a bit more on my next slide, which takes you through the prescriptive role of the ALNCO. Now, we are now, well, what are we now? March. So even though we're going live in September, there is no expectation that you need to be perfect by September. You just need to be better. So I've been saying this to all schools, all ALNCOs and all head teachers, and I've run a series of head teacher workshops across the region, and I've just finished doing the recent ALNCO training sessions as well. Because sometimes there is a, within our profession, there is an expectation that you really do have to be perfect by the time it goes live. I need to reassure you, we do not need to be perfect, but we do need to show that how we're trying to get better. We've got 3 years to get this right. We've got 3 years to get to excellence. And I do think it is possible to get to excellence within 3 years, but we shouldn't be setting ourselves up to fail in trying to do that by September. So this is a time for you as governors to make sure that your school is preparing to get better for September, and to use the time well, particularly around the rest of the workforce understanding the role of the ALNCO. Now that you have an ALNCO in post, the code is very, very clear. This does not remove the responsibility on all other teachers. All teachers are teachers of ALN. Now, the duties of the Act belong to the school, not to the ALNCO. Now, clearly, your ALNCO will be the go-to person to make sure that you as governors and the head teacher know what to do to comply with the Act. But it is a school's duty and not an ALNCO. It will be the duty of senior leaders to make sure that there are systems and processes up and running in schools to make sure that they can comply with the duties. So my last point there is just to say to governors, use the time well, use the time to plan to be better, so that in 3 years' time you will be able, with confidence, to be to demonstrate excellence in this area. If I could have the next slide then, please. Now, for the first time ever, we have a prescribed description for the role of the ALNCO. To date, we've had SENCOs in the system, Special Educational Needs Coordinators, and there was no national description of roles and responsibilities. And of course that meant that every single school could create a Senko in whatever image they needed, which has obviously undoubtedly led to a huge amount of variation across Wales. So again, part of the attempt of the code is to make it clear what are the responsibilities and the skill set and expectations around this role. Now in the code, there's a whole page, there's a whole chapter dedicated to it, but I've just gone and preceded it for you now, just to give you a flavour of the expectations. Now, first of all, it's a strategic role. It is not an operational role. It really is strategic. And we do have quite a few of our Senkos in the system that have been operational for quite some time. So this is just reminding people that this role is very different to the role of the Senko. And the ALNCO is expected to work with the senior leadership team to make sure that you plan and manage the delivery of the duties across the school. He or she will not be responsible for doing that themselves, but of course it's about making sure that there's a whole school system to doing this. Now the role of the ALNCO will be to guide the SLT. In some instances, the ALNCO will be on the SLT, and that's fine. There's nowhere in the code that says that the ALNCO has to be on the SLT, but you do need to be mindful of the fact that the code does say if the ALNCO is not on the SLT, there must be a clear line of sight to the SLT. It is nevertheless worth reminding you that it is a strategic role, so you need to be aware of that. And again, the role of the ALNCO, whether he or she is on the SLT or not, is to make sure that the senior leadership team does actually understand that it is its responsibility for making sure there are systems and processes for, first of all, identifying ALN and then putting in mitigating things to alleviate barriers to learning. The ALNCO will be expected to be involved with the head teacher in making decisions around budgets and resources. Now, all schools obviously have your budgets in the first place, and of course that's entirely the responsibility of the governing body. So in time, I would expect the ALNCO to have clarity about how much of your school budget is allocated to meeting the needs of your pupils that have got ALN. And of course, there are additional ways of getting money to meet the needs of additional learning, children with additional learning needs. And this is usually provided for through the local authority. Now, that's on top of what you provide from your own budget in the first place. So I'd expect an ALNCO to have a view on both pots of money about how you use your budget in the first place, and then how you use any additionality that you get from the local authority to support and scaffold further your provision in schools. The ALNCO will be expected to continue to provide professional advice to support your teachers and your teaching assistants about improving the quality of teaching and learning. In our system at the moment, we have very, very knowledgeable Senkos about all manner of ALN, and they are fabulously trained through excellent professional learning opportunities provided by local authority inclusion services. But this Act is asking us now to move, or to use that information, to use the knowledge about different types of ALN, but also to look at how do we then use that to inform better quality teaching and learning, so that we bring it back to helping all teachers to be good teachers of ALN without exception. So this is about trying to make sure that we develop the skill set of ordinary teachers to feel confident and competent about meeting the needs of ALN children in their classrooms at all times. And finally there, I've got a bullet point It's not exactly a skill to say that you won't be involved in day-to-day processes, but the skill is the ability to hold others to account, to make sure that they actually carry out their duties as envisaged by the code. Thank you. If I could have the next slide, please. Now, if you're wondering, do we have an idea of how well schools are progressing across our region in preparing the strategic role of the Additional Learning Needs Coordinator? So this time last year, we embarked on gathering this information from schools. And what this entailed was that the improvement partner, in a scheduled school visit, met with the head teacher and in some instances the ALNCO as well, and went through a set of questions, all related to preparing for the code and the rollout of the Act. And then together they were to come up with a joint judgment about how well progress was being made in schools. And you can see that that's a very, very promising picture. Schools across the region are doing really well to prepare for this Act. Now, the only caveat, of course, is we gathered this information and it was ready to go out by the 3rd week of March. Well, of course, 3rd week of March is when everybody went into lockdown. So I honestly can't say to you that we've done anything with this since, because to be honest with you, it would have been folly to start unpacking this when you as leaders and your head teachers had far bigger things to be dealing with. We still will be looking to pick up on doing something similar, although in a timely manner, because of course we recognise that schools are now only just opening up and getting their children back in. But we're still going to stick to the principles of why we were doing this. In our region, we are very committed to a cluster approach to doing things. And it is a school-led, school-to-school self-improving system. The purpose of trying to gather this information was to be able to identify those schools that are very confident and competent and feel that they have the capacity, because their progress is either very good or strong, that they are in a position to help those who do not feel that their progress is as good as what they would like to be. So you can see there's 13% making satisfactory progress and 1% making limited progress. So we need to start being able to signpost schools to others who do feel that they're in a good place to help others. So we've only started to relook at this now. We can't even pretend to say that this data is still reliable, because of course it was done a whole year ago, but we will look to try and salvage what we can, build something better, but still adhere to the principles of a school-led, school-to-school self-improving system. And if I could have the last slide, please. Now, this is to reassure you as governors, really, that we have embarked on a comprehensive professional learning programme, and the engagement of your ALNCOs has been phenomenal. And again, it's trying to show to you that what we are providing is very much in keeping with what is needed in the code, or the skill set that's described in the code, in order to be able to carry out the duties as prescribed in the code. And we're doing that through a cluster model where there are ALN cluster leads across the region, and what they do is meet with myself and LA officers and improvement partners on a regular basis, because they are the conduits between those of us that are outside schools and as well as all of the other ALNCOs in schools, because we're making sure that whatever we create has to be based in reality, has to reflect what ALNCOs are either currently experiencing or want in order to be able to improve. So your ALN cluster leads have co-created the professional learning programme and are co-delivering it with myself and LA officers and improvement partners. And then lastly, we recognise that if you are going to engage in all manner of professional learning activities, we recognise that that is a cost to the school. So every single mainstream school has had access to £990 each year for the last 3 years. And if you do have an ALN cluster lead, then there is an uplift of £495 because it recognises that you, the ALN cluster lead, would need to spend more time with myself and inclusion officers and improvement partners.